Okay, now we're moving over to the ever-present tips and tricks. So we've just got a few. In fact, we've got a bumper selection today, which is kind of rare for us. We've got 9 to show, and we've got a wide selection of contributors. First one, I'm very pleased to say, is Tom Kunzman from the US, from Cleveland, Ohio. So I'm really pleased to have Tom with us today. So some of these are pre-recorded, including Tom. So I'm just going to run through these, and you can watch them.
Hello, my name is Tom Kunzman from Cleveland, Ohio. And when I was given an opportunity to present some tips and tricks to the Manchester Revit user group, I was more than happy to do so. I've always have enjoyed the tips and tricks portion. Uh, I've really gained a lot of valuable insight into Revit and many of the little unknown features of the program. So I hope you enjoy what I want to share with you. So the first tip I wanted to share with you is if you ever have an AutoCAD import and you needed to recreate that inside of Revit. Tracing over those walls is sometimes a tedious process, but I found that this was, maybe a little bit quicker. So if you go to the wall and you have the wall centerline option selected, Revit actually will pick up the centerline of the 2 walls that you're trying to trace over from the AutoCAD link. So I thought that was really kind of neat. I know sometimes people will pick like the finish exterior, finish inside, and just use one of those. But I thought that was kind of useful. For my next tip, wanted to show you if you have like a desk or whatever that you needed to place, and if you hit the space bar, Revit will only rotate that every 90 degrees, and if you needed to have this component, if it's a desk or whatever, rotated at a 45-degree angle, it can be done, and there's a couple different ways of doing it. But if you hold that component near the intersection of a 90-degree wall and then continue to hit the space bar, Revit will then cycle over for 45 degrees. So I thought that was really kind of neat and didn't really know that. My next little tip that I had has to deal with materials. So just using this desk as an example, if I select it and go to edit type, there's this cherry material. If I wanted that to be part of for the handle and leg, which is currently steel, you have to like click in here and go to the material browser and scroll through it or filter through it to try and find it, especially if there's a lot of materials. But a faster way is you can actually just click in here, do Control C for copy, then select the field that you want to copy it to, then Control V for paste. Go ahead and hit enter so that Revit will recognize that. So now you've successfully copied the material to another part of that family. So I thought that was really kind of neat, and just like never realized that would work, but it does. So for my last tip, I wanted to show that you can actually place a dimension in a 3D view, and that 3D view does not have to be locked. Right now, this is just one of the sample projects that come with Revit, and that you'll notice that right now it is unlocked. So what you have to do is you come over here to the set work plane, then use the pick a plane option, and then you basically select like this front face of this wall by tabbing. It was probably a little hard since I have the colors selected. Then you can come up here to the dimension, and you can actually then dimension this that curtain wall window opening. And then you can actually then rotate this, and then that dimension stays there. So I thought that was really kind of neat that you don't have to have a locked view, but the dimension does stay. So I'm not sure if you really want that to be there all the time. So that might be only useful if you have to make like a quick little snippet or something, and send that to your coworker. But So it's just kind of neat that you don't have to have a 3D view locked. You just got to remember to set the work plane first, pick a plane, and then go ahead and use the dimension. So hopefully you find that useful and can play around with it and um, come to utilize it. So that's all I had. Thank you very much.
And thanks again to Tom for those. Really appreciate you sending those over to me and joining us today. Unfortunately, Joachim couldn't join us this time. So he's sent through one of his delightful tips and tricks. That is the most obscene and dirty hack I have ever seen inside Revit. I would say use that with caution, because if you're trying to get multiple views looking the same, you've really got to be careful. Okay, next up we have Mark Howarth from AEW, who's contributed some stuff about finding detail groups.
Hi everyone, this is a couple of quick tips that build on something that Joachim presented a couple of years ago at an MRUG about finding detail groups within your model. So just to recap on the method that was shown a couple of years ago at a previous meeting, if you right click on a detail group, select all instances in an entire project, you get all the ones being placed, all 17 instances. And then if you try and group those, because they're on different views, you won't be able to. So you get a warning. If you expand that warning, click export, you can then export the warnings and the location of the element IDs into a HTML file. You can then use the element ID to copy, go into manage, select by ID, paste, and it'll take you to that location. But unfortunately you have to do that for each individual detail group, leading to a lot of HTML files and a lot of time. Whereas if we go into Dynamo, we can quite quickly use a bit of Python, which we got off the Dynamo forum for a similar question, where we collect all the detail groups in the model and all the instances of each detail group. We can then split it out into detail groups that haven't been placed, the views that a detail group has been placed in, and the detail group name. Working through, we then just write that data to Excel. We can also use Dynamo to purge out the detail groups not placed if we're absolutely sure that we don't want them anymore. And there we go, we've got an Excel spreadsheet where on one workbook we have all the detail groups not placed, what time the script was run, and all the detail groups, what view they've been placed in the element ID. So again, we can go in and use the element ID to hunt out a specific one on a sheet to work out whether we want to keep it or not. There is a third way if you don't want to have to go through Dynamo, which if you have the case apps, which are available for free via GitHub, then you can go in onto case apps 1 and you got report group by view. They'll ask you whether you want to include the model groups as well as detail groups. You can click that out and it will save a CSV file, and that again can be loaded in, and you've got the group element ID and which view it's been placed in. This method is really handy if you've got somebody who has done a detail group and then arrayed that group. We had one instance where somebody drew a brick, grouped the line work, and then arrayed it across to give themselves brick dimensions, and the other methods wouldn't find the method. So I had a report of 15,000 bricks within the model, but couldn't find where they are because the element ID won't pick up the ID of the individual brick, but I could find it in the array group. So for those of you who haven't heard of case apps before, they've been around for a good number of years, but the original developers were bought out by WeWork back in about 2015 or so. They later made the toolbar open source, and now John Pearson, who some of you may know through the Dynamo groups, has taken on the casework and uploaded it to GitHub and is now available all the way up to Revit 2020.
Okay, thank you, Mark, for sending that one in. Okay, so finally, I've just got 3 that I'm just going to fire up for you, and I'll just let these play. Hope you enjoy them. Quite possibly the most complex title of the day. If you're dealing with geometries such as this, where you have tetrahedra and on a complex shape, you want to ensure that the apex is above the surface. So here's an example where if we move a point to any position, that the apex of the tetrahedron is above the object. Now let's just have a quick look how we create something like this. We use a generic model adaptive component. So we'll just build the basics for this. Just turn these into adaptive points. And what we'll then do is we'll start off just by creating 2 reference planes. Reference lines that span across and they go to the midpoint on the opposite side. We create a point on the surface or on one of the lines, and then we host by intersection and we select the opposite line. And what this now allows us to do is host a point on there. And if we move this point, so we'll set this a point above the space, we can see that if we move one of our adaptive points, that it moves with it. But there is an issue with this method, because if you move other points, you can actually see that the apex point is vertically above the original point and not where the orange rectangle is. So you can see actually using this method isn't great, and it doesn't really work for objects where it's going to be working on multiple planes. And the reason for this is that the reference lines don't orientate themselves to the shape and don't update themselves. So this method, if you're dealing with multiple or complex surfaces, doesn't really work for you. So the tip and trick for this is, so we'll just start off again, just drawing our shape, but instead of drawing the reference lines, this time we'll actually create a surface. And then on this surface, we'll place a point and draw it on the face. And we'll pick a point anywhere on the surface, and then we'll come into the hosted U and V parameters and set these to 0. And what this does is it moves it to the center of the shape. And then we can host another point on the previous point that we created, and then we can offset this from the surface. So now this is offset, we can have a look in 3D. Oops, you can see that some of the points that I created weren't flat, but that doesn't really make any difference to this, so I just level these out. And you can see that the point, or the apex, now moves and remains perpendicular from the surface itself. So quickly, the final thing to do is just join all these up and then create the shapes. So I use reference lines to ensure that the reference geometry stays there later on. And then there we have it. We have our tetrahedron. This tip is how to accurately move geometry inside Revit. So we've got an example where we've got multiple groups of objects here. We want to move them all together. Now if you select them, you don't get any dimensions, but if you come up to your options bar and click on activate dimensions, you get the temporary dimensions. And what you can do, you can move these around, and you can then use these to accurately place geometry. You just got to remember to move the witness lines, and then you get some decent control of about where you want this geometry to be. Nice little tip. It's great for things, bits and pieces like furniture as well, but it's also really useful if you're moving large parts of your building, such as this, and you can just kind of update things quite quickly. Okay, here's a quick way of creating view filters and selecting categories. Normally you go to your visibility and graphics and go to your filters, you say edit, new, and then you create a new filter, and then you go through and select all the categories. Obviously this is quite a slow process and you can often miss things that are inside your model, but there is a better way of doing this, thankfully. So just ignoring that way of doing it, the way to do it is to select everything in your view that you want to create a filter for, go to the View tab and then click on Filters, click New, and then once you've done this, the objects that you've selected will be highlighted within the categories already, saving you the issue. Okay, and that's it from tips and tricks. Hope you found them useful, and there's at least one thing in there for you to take away and worthwhile for you.